Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you use these episodes to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story 1. It was a gray, dull Tuesday when they brought her in. Female, 23 years old, Sarah Mitchell, from Bristol. Train accident. The paperwork indicated that she had fallen onto the tracks at Paddington Station. The body arrived in what I would professionally describe as a very compromised state. Her face had suffered considerable trauma from the impact. There were multiple fractures in the orbital bones, deep lacerations on her cheeks and forehead, and a substantial loss of tissue around the mouth. I have been working as an embalmer at Whitfield & Sons Funeral Services for almost 15 years. In this profession, you develop a certain degree of detachment. Not coldness, of course. Always respect. Respect above all. But you learn to see the body as a final project, a last service you provide to someone who can no longer speak for themselves. The family wanted an open casket viewing. Ambitious, considering the condition of the body, though not impossible. I had reconstructed worse cases. Her mother had given me recent photographs. A pretty young woman with delicate features, light brown hair, and a soft smile. A face difficult to recreate, but not beyond my capabilities. I began with the usual preparations: washing, disinfecting, arranging the features. The reconstruction would be extensive. I used wax compounds to rebuild the damaged areas, sculpting carefully to match the photographs. Nearly 6 hours of meticulous work. By evening, I had managed to restore a reasonable likeness of her features. Not perfect, never perfect in cases like these, but dignified and peaceful. For the final details, I applied makeup. Nothing excessive, just enough to add some color to the pale skin and conceal the remaining imperfections. A neutral base, a touch of blush, and a very light pink lipstick. Barely noticeable, just enough to define the lips I had reconstructed. Her mother had mentioned that Sarah hardly wore makeup, so I kept it minimal. Professional, but natural. By 9 that night, I was finished. Exhausted, but satisfied with the result. I covered her with a sheet, dimmed the lights in the preparation room, and locked the door before leaving. Everything according to protocol. Everything as it should be. The next morning, I returned at 7. The family was scheduled to see her at noon, so I needed to make the final adjustments to her hair, clothing, and placement in the casket. Routine procedure. When I removed the sheet, something struck me as odd. I can't explain it precisely. 20 years in this profession gives you an instinct for when something is out of place. At first glance, everything was exactly as I had left it. But as I leaned closer to inspect the reconstruction, I noticed her lips. They were different. Darker. Much darker. Where I had applied a pale pink shade the night before, her lips now bore a deep burgundy, almost wine-colored, perfectly outlined with a flawless, even finish. An application that required skill. I stared at them in confusion. Had I used another color without realizing it? No. I remembered with absolute clarity selecting the light pink from my kit. Could chemical processes in the body have altered the pigment overnight? Scientifically improbable, if not impossible. I checked the preparation room. All my tools and cosmetics were exactly where I had left them. That burgundy lipstick I now saw on Sarah wasn't even mine. I never used that shade. It's too bold for most families' requests. I asked my colleague Margaret if she had come in early to make adjustments. She said no. I asked the director, Mr. Whitfield, if perhaps the family had come by outside their scheduled time. They hadn't. The security system confirmed that no one had entered since I left the night before. I considered removing the lipstick and reapplying the original shade, but something stopped me. A feeling I can't describe. Instead, I took photographs to document the change. More for my sanity than anything else. At noon, the family arrived. I watched them nervously as they approached the casket, expecting questions about the bold lipstick. But her mother simply stroked her daughter's hand and whispered, "She looks beautiful, just like herself." As they withdrew, the woman paused beside me. "Thank you for the lipstick," she said softly. That shade, midnight burgundy. It was her favorite. She always wore it when she went out. I forgot to mention it yesterday. I nodded, unable to speak. "It's perfect," she added. Exactly how she would have wanted to look. I didn't have the courage to tell her that I hadn't applied that color. What for? To trouble a grieving mother with something I couldn't explain? To suggest the impossible? That night I reviewed the security footage myself. The room had remained empty all night. The overhead camera showed nothing unusual, just the still form beneath the sheet. No movement, no visitors. And yet, at 3:17 a.m., something happened. Not movement exactly, but a subtle alteration in the light. An almost imperceptible darkening around her head that lasted about 40 seconds. The sheet never moved. Nothing visibly changed. But when I adjusted the contrast and zoomed in, it looked as though a shadow had passed across her face. Or maybe it was just a recording glitch. In this line of work, I've encountered things that are hard to explain. Bodies that feel heavier after death than in life. Rooms that suddenly turn icy cold without reason. That eerie sense of not being alone when you clearly are. But this was different. More personal. Somehow more deliberate. I never told anyone about the lipstick. What would I have said? That a dead girl had painted her own lips? That something or someone came in the night to prepare her for her final presentation? Either way, I would have sounded unhinged if not disturbed. Sometimes I think about Sarah Mitchell, not about the broken body that arrived on my table, but about the young woman in the photos. Always smiling, almost always wearing that distinctive burgundy lipstick. I wonder if in her final moments on the platform she had regrets, unfinished business, things left unsaid or undone. Perhaps she simply wasn't ready for her farewell without that detail, that touch of color that made her feel like herself. In our work, we talk about granting dignity in death, about honoring the person who once inhabited the body we now prepare. But maybe in ways we don't understand, they too find a way to take part in that final presentation. To make sure they are remembered as they lived, not just as we present them. I still keep the photographs I took that morning, evidence of something I cannot explain. I keep them locked in my desk, not as proof of the supernatural, but as a reminder that death, like life, rarely fits into the molds we try to force upon it. Sometimes when I work late, I catch myself watching the security monitors more often, alert for subtle changes in the light, wondering if perhaps we are not the only ones preparing the dead for their final journey. Story 2. It was an especially cold January morning when they brought her in. Female, 28 years old, Rebecca Collins, from a small town outside Manchester. The paperwork stated that she had died during childbirth. A severe hemorrhage the doctors could not control. The baby had not survived either. A double tragedy that, even in my 17 years as an embalmer at Hartley Funeral Services, felt particularly cruel. Rebecca arrived looking serene, almost peaceful, despite what she had endured. Her skin was pale as alabaster, and her dark hair framed a face that still bore traces of the pain she must have experienced in her final moments. Her abdomen displayed the unmistakable signs of emergency procedures, hastily applied sutures where doctors had desperately tried to save both mother and child. The family had requested special care. They wanted her prepared for a private farewell before the closed casket service. Her husband, a quiet man with a vacant stare, had brought the clothing. A simple blue dress that, as he explained, she had bought specifically to wear when leaving the hospital with her baby. The irony was painful, but this profession teaches you to accept such contradictions without comment. I began the usual preparations with more care than normal. There is something about maternal deaths that demands additional delicacy. I worked methodically through the embalming process, paying particular attention to the abdominal area. The medical interventions had left considerable damage, requiring extensive reconstruction and fresh sutures before I could proceed properly. During the process, I found myself speaking to her softly, something I rarely do. Not because I believed she could hear me, but as a human response to the tragedy. No one should leave this world that way. in pain and fear, watching the promise of new life collapse into tragedy within moments. By late afternoon, I finished the embalming and moved to the cosmetic work. Her husband had given me a recent photograph. Rebecca at a garden party, smiling broadly, her hand resting tenderly on her swollen belly. I tried to recreate that warmth in her features, though of course there are limits to what can be achieved. Death keeps certain territories that art cannot recover. I carefully arranged her hands at her sides, styled her hair as it appeared in the photograph, and dressed her in the blue dress her husband had brought. The fabric hung awkwardly over her now flat abdomen, a dress meant for a different outcome, a different homecoming. It was nearly 8 p.m. when I finished. The farewell was scheduled for 10 o'clock the next morning. I made my final checks, adjusted the lighting in the preparation room, and covered her with a sheet. Everything was in order. Everything as it should be, given the circumstances. I locked the door and drove home through the dark January night, the weight of the day following me like a shadow. At 7 a.m., I returned for the final adjustments before the family's arrival. The room was exactly as I had left it, silent, orderly, with a dim light. I approached the table and gently pulled back the sheet to ensure everything was in place. That's when I heard it. A sound so faint I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. A muffled, rhythmic noise coming from somewhere in the room. I froze, listening closely. There it was again. Soft, distant, but unmistakable. I shook my head. Perhaps it was lack of sleep or the building settling in the morning cold. I refocused on Rebecca. Everything seemed as I had left it, except her face. Something was different. I leaned closer. Had her expression changed? No, that was impossible. And yet there was something, a tension around the eyes that hadn't been there before. And those marks on her cheeks. I touched one with the tip of my finger, dry but evident, like the trace left by an evaporated tear. I stepped back, trying to make sense of it. Post-mortem fluids? Possible, though unlikely given the thorough embalming. A chemical reaction with the makeup? Unlikely. As I wrestled with these doubts, I noticed something else. Her hands. The night before, I had placed them carefully at her sides, palms down, fingers gently curved in a natural position. Now her right hand rested on her abdomen, fingers extended, as though protecting or consoling. The exact same posture from the photograph, the pose of an expectant mother. I checked the previous day's documentation, which included photos of the final positioning. There was no mistake. Her hand had been at her side when I left. The sound returned, that muffled rhythmic noise. I turned slowly, scanning the room. It came from the cabinet where we keep personal effects. I approached cautiously and opened the drawer containing Rebecca's belongings. Inside was a small hospital paper bag with the few objects she had carried. A wedding ring, a silver necklace, a mobile phone. The screen was dark, but as I looked, it vibrated softly against the paper bag. I picked it up carefully. The screen lit up with a notification. Pregnancy tracking app. Your little one is now the size of a melon. Only 8 weeks left until you meet them. An automatic reminder programmed months earlier, back when the future still held hope. A cruel coincidence, nothing more. I turned off the phone and placed it back in the drawer. When I turned back toward Rebecca, I froze. Her hand was no longer on her abdomen. It was back at her side, exactly as I had left it. I blinked several times, stunned. Yes, her hand was in place. Had I imagined the change, projected my emotions onto her poor body? Perhaps, but those tear marks on her cheeks remained. Undeniable. I thought about calling my colleague Daniel to confirm what I was seeing, but something stopped me. What would I say? That I thought a dead woman had moved her hand? That she seemed to have cried? Instead, I took photographs to document it, then carefully cleaned away the tear marks and retouched the makeup. I checked the position of her hands one last time and stepped back to assess. Perfect. Serene, as though the strange episode had never happened. The family arrived promptly at 10 a.m. Her husband entered first, accompanied by his parents who supported him. They approached slowly with hesitant steps, as though nearing something both precious and terrifying. I stood at a respectful distance, watching as he reached out to touch his wife's hand. He remained there for a long moment, silent tears running down his face. Then he leaned forward and whispered something into her ear. Private words meant only for her. As he straightened, I saw him freeze. His expression shifted from grief to confusion. Slowly, very slowly, he raised his hand to his cheek. "She's crying," he said, barely audible. I hurried to intervene. "Sir, sometimes embalming fluids can..." But he wasn't listening. He stared at Rebecca's face, his eyes wide with a mixture of wonder and devastation. "Look," he whispered. I leaned beside him and saw it, a single tear track on her right cheek, fresh, glistening under the soft light of the room. Impossible, completely impossible. Her husband looked at me, eyes wide, and then I saw it. Her hand. It shifted just barely, as if trying to reach. I had no words. No scientific explanation could account for it. No rational answer I could give. Before I could react, a sound filled the room. A soft, muffled cry. Not from any of us, but from somewhere indeterminate. Far away and close all at once, like it was coming from underwater. Her husband's face transformed. "That sound," he stammered. "It sounds like..." He never finished. The sound came again. A delicate cry, a faint whimper. Unmistakable. The cry of a newborn. For several seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. We stood in that charged silence, listening to something that could not exist. Then, as suddenly as it began, it faded. The tear on Rebecca's cheek dried, leaving only a faint trace. The moment, whatever it was over. Her husband looked at me, then back at her. "She found our baby," he said firmly. It wasn't a question, but an absolute certainty. I didn't contradict him. How could I? Science and reason had no place here. The rest of the farewell passed without incident. The family said their goodbyes. The funeral was held the next day. Everything returned to normal, or as close to normal as one can expect in a profession that deals daily with grief and loss. But I often think of Rebecca Collins, of what happened in that silent room on a cold January morning. I never documented it officially, never mentioned it to my colleagues. What purpose would it serve? Some experiences exist in that space between what we know and what we believe, in the silences between one heartbeat and the next. I've been embalming for nearly 2 decades. I've prepared hundreds of bodies, witnessed countless expressions of grief. I understand the chemistry of death, the biology of decay, the techniques that let us create the illusion of peaceful sleep where only absence remains. But sometimes, in the quietest moments of my work, I remember that sound, that soft, impossible cry. And I wonder if perhaps the bonds we form in life, especially those that connect a mother to her child, can resonate beyond the boundaries we've drawn between life and death. Not as ghosts or spirits, nor as the supernatural trappings people cling to for comfort, but as something simpler and deeper. The resonance of love that continues to vibrate in the silence, even after everything else has gone still. Story 3. It was an unremarkable Thursday when they brought him in. Male, 76 years old, Harold Thompson from Portland, Maine. Cause of death, stroke. The paperwork indicated that his caregiver had found him already deceased. I've worked at Eastbrook Funeral Home for 20 years. Mr. Thompson's case appeared standard. An elderly man, natural causes, no significant trauma. His body showed the expected signs. Discoloration on the right side of his face, the typical asymmetry of stroke victims, and the rigidity already set in. The family, a son from Boston and a daughter from Chicago, requested an open casket service. They chose a blue suit, provided photographs, and asked that we make him look at peace. Nothing unusual. The embalming process went smoothly. By afternoon, I had completed the main preparation and moved on to positioning the body. That's when I noticed the first strange detail. His neck muscles displayed an unusual amount of tension, making it difficult to position his head properly. The stroke had caused a strong contraction in the right sternocleidomastoid muscle, pulling his head to one side. I worked carefully to relax the tissue and bring the head back to center. In the end, I managed it, straight, facing upward. I noted the muscular issue in case further adjustments were needed later. Then I finished the rest of the preparations, clothing, hair, cosmetic touch-ups, and documented everything with photographs. By 7 p.m., Mr. Thompson looked dignified and serene. I covered him, dimmed the lights, and closed the room. When I returned at 8 a.m., something felt off. The atmosphere carried a strange undertone. I removed the sheet. Everything was almost exactly as I had left it. The suit smooth, the hands in proper position, except for his head. It was no longer straight. It had shifted slightly to the right, maybe 15 degrees. I checked my notes and photographs. Without a doubt, I had left his head aligned the night before. I thought perhaps the muscular contraction had reasserted itself. Odd, but not impossible. I repositioned it, this time using additional supports. The family wasn't scheduled until 4 p.m., so I decided to check on him each hour. By 10 a.m., his head had shifted again, a few more degrees, noticeable enough that the family would find it unnatural. I readjusted it, this time with firmer supports and stronger fixatives. By noon, his head had turned even further, nearly 30 degrees. That was more than unusual. The embalming should have stabilized the tissue and held the posture. I consulted my colleague, Dr. Winters. He examined Mr. Thompson and confirmed there was no mechanical reason for the movement. He suggested it might be an interaction between the stroke damage and the embalming chemicals. I've seen similar things in accident victims, he said. Together, we repositioned Mr. Thompson's head using specialized techniques Dr. Winters had developed. By 2 p.m., despite our efforts, the head had turned again, now nearly 45 degrees, as though he were looking toward the corner of the room. The problem was serious. The family would arrive in 2 hours, expecting to see their father at peace. I decided to document the phenomenon. I set up a camera on a tripod, repositioned his head one last time, and started recording. Then I left to finish the family paperwork. 30 minutes later, I reviewed the footage. For the first 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then, exactly at 10:17, the head began to move. It wasn't gradual drift. It was deliberate. It turned smoothly to the right, a continuous motion lasting about 20 seconds, as though he were looking at something. I replayed the footage over and over, searching for an explanation. Air currents, vibrations, anything. But there was nothing. Only the impossible sight of a dead man's head turning by its own will. I checked the clock. 3:15 p.m. The family would arrive in 45 minutes. I rushed back to the room and froze at the doorway. Mr. Thompson's head was fully turned to the right, gazing directly toward the corner where we kept personal belongings. His eyes were still closed, but the direction was unmistakable, intentional. I approached cautiously. As I touched his skin to correct the posture, I felt something I had never experienced before, a subtle vibration, like a faint humming emanating from within the tissue. It wasn't electrical, it wasn't mechanical, it was something else. It lasted only a moment. I stood frozen, unable to process what I had felt. Then I noticed something on the floor near the cabinet. A small metallic object. A wedding ring, gold, worn down by the years. Engraved with the initials HT and ET, along with a date from 52 years ago. I checked the inventory. The ring was supposed to be stored in the drawer with his other belongings. I opened the cabinet. Inside was the envelope containing his watch, wallet, and glasses. But the ring was gone. I looked back at Mr. Thompson. His head remained turned toward the corner where I had found the ring. The family would arrive any moment. I had to decide. In the end, I left him as he was, with his head turned to the side. I placed the ring in his left hand and adjusted the posture so the tilt looked natural, as if he were simply resting. When the family arrived, I explained that I had positioned their father's head that way due to muscular tension caused by the stroke. His daughter noticed the ring immediately. "You put his wedding ring in his hand," she said softly, her voice breaking. "He never took it off after Mom died. He always said he was still married, that even though she was gone, nothing had changed. His son looked at his father's face and murmured, "It's strange. His head is tilted to the side, exactly the way we found him when he died, looking toward the corner of his room." The nurse said that happens sometimes with stroke victims, but he paused. That's where Mom's picture was on the nightstand. He was looking at her. I didn't know how to respond. The service passed without incident. Everything returned to routine. Everything except me. I've never told anyone about the recording, never shown it to colleagues. What would be the point? But I keep the file on my personal drive. Sometimes I watch it at night. I watch over and over as a dead man's head turns with purpose. And I wonder about the things we think we understand about life and death. I think of Harold Thompson, who died gazing at his wife's photograph, and who, in my preparation room, insisted on turning toward the corner where somehow his wedding ring had ended up. I question whether bonds ever truly break when the heart stops beating. I don't claim to know what happened. I have no explanations, only the experience, preserved in a file I can never share, and in a memory that refuses to fade. Sometimes when I prepare a body, especially those who left behind someone they deeply loved, I catch myself glancing at the corners of the room. I wonder what they're looking for. I wonder what they might still see.